Okay, let's go ahead and do page 2 of World Civilizations for chapter 2. So just continuing from our first page in this area of basically the Middle East. Hammurabi or Hammurabi, he was the leader of Babylon, which is a city-state south of Akkad. And he gained control of Sumer and Akkad in 1792 BC. Doesn't look very happy. So what he's most known for was his code, the Code of Hammurabi. His most lasting contribution was this collection of laws, and it was based on a system of strict justice. So if you've ever heard the phrasing of an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, it was that law that was based on. So if, say, you got in a fight and you knocked a tooth out of a guy, well, the punishment was they would knock your tooth out. And say you blinded somebody, then they would blind you in one eye or however many. So it was kind of whatever the offense was, the punishment was about equal. If you were stealing, they cut off your hand. So you can imagine that a lot of people were not involved in wrongdoings. They didn't want the same things happening to them. So yes, it seems very strict. I don't know if you remember me telling in geography a story. There was a young man a number of years ago, went over to Singapore, and I don't know why he would have thought this was a good idea, especially in a foreign country, to take some spray paint and go graffiti on a car. Well, he was caught, and I don't know if they put him in prison, but the punishment was going to be 6 canings. So what they did is they took a bamboo stick or pole, which is hollow, and then they cut slits into it. So then he was bent over, he didn't have a shirt on, he was bent over, and they hit him with this bamboo stick on the back. And since it has those slits in it, it would open up as it was pushed down onto him, and then as it came back off, it would sometimes grab flesh, skin, and be very, very painful. Well, so everybody was in an uproar. Well, he didn't know, and the president even got involved, and everybody was just all up in arms about the whole thing. And I'm just sitting there thinking, it serves him right, you know? I mean, I'm sorry, but what is this phrase? When in Rome, do as the Romans do? You don't go into a foreign country, find out what their laws are if you don't want to find yourself into problems. Well, after it was all said and done, they reduced it to 4, but he still received those 4 canings. Littering is a huge fine, $500 to $1,000. So as you can imagine, it's a very clean city. They have very little crime. So even though they're harsh, they are effective. And I think in our own country, sometimes we could, in some areas, maybe have a little bit stricter laws. Okay, so now we're going to move into Egyptian civilization. We've got, of course, the pyramids. Egypt, very well known for the pyramids. But what a lot of people don't realize, so the pyramids were built on the Giza Plateau. But you can see in the background, that's the city of Cairo. That's the capital of Egypt. It's not that far away. In fact, I read somewhere recently that there's like a KFC, like less than a mile away from the pyramids. So kind of a cool picture with those helicopters going in front. Okay, so the gift of the Nile, term used by Herodotus about the Nile River, meaning it would be a desert without it. So you've got the Nile River, which is the longest river in the world, over 4,000 miles long. And as it goes along into Egypt and many places, for 2 or 3 miles wide out beyond the river is a lot of rich, fertile soil, farm ground. People live along that. So you have to have water to survive. And that's why it's called the gift of the Nile. So the gift of the Nile basically would be life. And if the river wasn't there, there wouldn't be anybody living there. Okay, silt is rich soil carried by the flooding rivers. You can see this river here, how brown comes into this water. You can see the silt going out into it. Here's a shovel with some silt on it. So what happened was the ancient Egyptians had 3 seasons. They had the flooding, and they depended on this flooding. This silt would be carried down the rivers. It would flood onto the farm ground, and that silt and sediment would rejuvenate the soil. It would be like fertilizer, since they didn't know of fertilizer like we do today. And so they came to depend on that flooding. So the flooding, the coming forth as the plants and things would start growing, and then the harvest. So they had 3 seasons, 4 months, each 4 months long. Lower Egypt is the delta region where the Nile empties into the Mediterranean. So for us, in the United States, we often think of the Mississippi River and flowing south, so this would be down or lower. But when we think of the Nile, obviously it flows to the north into the Mediterranean Sea. And so the lower elevation of the river would be the northern part. So when we talk about Lower Egypt, it would be, I'm trying to think where the first, anyway, somewhere right in here, okay, to the Mediterranean where it empties. That would be Lower Egypt. Then Upper Egypt is from the first cataract. A cataract is a waterfall north to within 100 miles of the Mediterranean. And so I don't see a scale on here. So again, from the first cataract up to about 100 miles from the Mediterranean, and that's Upper Egypt. So the upper part of the river and the lower part of the river. So Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt. A delta then, as you could see in that picture as well, is a triangular shaped area of marshland that's formed by deposits of silt at the mouth of some rivers. And so you can see how it creates this triangle shape, and so basically here, and across, you've got all of this area. The river kind of divides and goes out into these smaller distributaries, they're called, because it's taking water away from the main river. But that's a delta. So it says my battery's running low. Close that out so I can see it. Okay. King Menes united Upper and Lower Egypt into a single kingdom and created the first royal dynasty. So I hope I'm right in this, but I believe the red hat was Lower Egypt and the white was Upper Egypt. And then when he combined the two, they took the 2 hats and combined them into one. But again, the first royal dynasty, 3100 BC. A dynasty is a family of rulers who pass on the right to rule within the same family. So father to a son, to a grandson, to a nephew, even a cousin, a brother's son. Somehow it stays within the same family. We don't really use that term a lot today. Maybe if a particular sports team is dominating their sport for a while, we might say, well, they're a dynasty. This is also part of the Old Kingdom from 2700 to 2200 BC. Pharaohs was the title of Egyptian monarchs, and it meant great house. Then the vizier was the steward of the whole land and was in charge of the government. So as I mentioned, okay, Pharaoh, considered a god, religious leader, but also the government leader. And then the vizier and some others were kind of in charge of day-to-day activities. Something about this little goatee that was always pretty prominent in most pharaohs that you see. And that's the end of page 2. We've got a little chart here. You can see kind of the social makeup. We'll look at it and talk about it again. But the pharaoh, vizier, high priest, nobles, priests, engineers, doctors, scribes, craftsmen, soldiers, farmers, and tomb builders. And so depending on which one of these you look at, there's quite a few different ones. Some of these might be switched, some might be combined into one level of this social pyramid for Egypt. Okay, thank you.